Chosen one, you hold a kingdom authority most never receive. Very few qualify. When you hear the phrase kingdom authority, it is easy to imagine crowns, power, status, or some kind of external control over others. That is not what this message is pointing to. The authority being described is not about dominance, privilege, or superiority. It is about self-governance, emotional regulation, discernment, and the ability to remain aligned with your values under pressure. Very few people develop this kind of internal authority, not because it is reserved for special individuals, but because it requires sustained responsibility, reflection, and restraint. It requires facing discomfort instead of avoiding it, choosing integrity instead of convenience, and remaining conscious when distraction is easier. This type of authority is not given. It is built. Stay with this message until the very end, because each layer builds on the one before it, and understanding deepens as you move through it. And write your warmest wishes in the comments and include the number 144 as a conscious act of intention and energetic focus. This moment reflects a chapter where inner alignment begins to translate into outward stability, where belief is paired with disciplined action, and where attention starts to shape direction. This is the only place where wishes are mentioned, because from here forward, the focus moves fully into responsibility, maturity, and grounded strength. Now, chosen one, press the hype button, like this video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the channel, and let's start. What does it actually mean to hold authority over your own life? It means that your emotions do not dictate your behavior. It means that impulses do not control your decisions. It means that external pressure does not easily override your internal compass. Many people are intelligent, talented, and capable, but they are still ruled by habits, fears, unresolved emotions, and social expectations. That is not a moral failure. It is simply the result of never learning how to regulate the nervous system and manage attention intentionally. Internal authority begins when you recognize that you are responsible not just for what you do, but for how you respond. One of the clearest signs of internal authority is the ability to pause. Pause before reacting. Pause before committing. Pause before assuming. That pause creates space for choice. Choice is where authority lives. Without that space, behavior becomes automatic, driven by old patterns and emotional reflexes rather than conscious intention. Another sign is emotional steadiness. This does not mean you stop feeling. It means feelings no longer control your actions. You can feel anger without becoming aggressive. You can feel sadness without collapsing into hopelessness. You can feel excitement without making reckless choices. Emotional regulation is one of the rarest and most powerful forms of authority a person can develop. You may also notice that your tolerance for chaos decreases as your internal authority grows. Disorganized environments, unstable relationships, constant drama, and inconsistent routines begin to feel exhausting rather than normal. This is not judgment. It is sensitivity to misalignment. Your system seeks coherence because coherence supports clarity and stability. Another element of authority is discipline that comes from self-respect rather than punishment. You keep commitments to yourself. You follow through even when motivation fluctuates. You build routines that support health, focus, and emotional balance. This consistency compounds into confidence because you trust yourself to act in your own best interest. Internal authority also shows up in how you handle responsibility. You do not avoid it, but you also do not overcarry what does not belong to you. You understand the difference between ownership and control. You manage what you can influence and release what you cannot. This balance prevents burnout and resentment. You may also notice that your thinking becomes more strategic and less reactive. Instead of jumping to conclusions or acting on immediate emotion, you evaluate options, consider consequences, and choose with intention. This cognitive clarity protects you from repeating cycles that once felt inevitable. Another sign is improved boundaries. You say no when something does not align. You protect your time and energy. You stop explaining yourself excessively. Boundaries are not walls. They are filters that preserve your capacity for what truly matters. Internal authority also transforms how you experience setbacks. Instead of interpreting difficulty as proof that you are failing, you treat it as information. You adjust, learn, and continue. This resilience allows long-term progress instead of emotional derailment. You may also find that your sense of identity becomes less dependent on external validation. You do not need constant approval to trust your direction. You measure growth internally through consistency, clarity, and alignment, rather than applause. Another quiet shift is how you relate to power itself. Power no longer means control over others. It means control over your reactions, habits, and priorities. This form of power is subtle, but it is what actually shapes outcomes over time. You may also notice that your communication becomes more grounded. You speak clearly. You listen without absorbing unnecessary emotional charge. You address issues earlier rather than letting resentment build. This emotional maturity strengthens relationships and reduces conflict. Internal authority also shows up in patience. You stop rushing to prove worth or force results. You respect process. You allow growth to compound. This patience protects sustainability and prevents exhaustion-driven decisions. You may also find that your attention becomes more intentional. You are aware of what you consume mentally and emotionally. You choose depth over constant stimulation. This focus strengthens learning and creative capacity. Another important element is humility. You recognize that growth is ongoing. You remain open to feedback and learning. Humility protects you from rigid thinking and keeps development active. You may also experience increased self-compassion. You correct mistakes without cruelty. You acknowledge effort even when outcomes are imperfect. This balanced self-relationship supports resilience and motivation. Internal authority is also reflected in how you manage stress. You recognize early signs of overload and adjust before crisis. You use rest, movement, reflection, and structure to regulate your system. This proactive regulation preserves long-term health. You may also notice that your values become clearer. You make decisions based on what supports stability, integrity, and growth, rather than short-term comfort or social pressure. This values-based decision-making strengthens alignment. Another shift is how you experience leadership in your own life. You guide your habits, schedule, and priorities with intention rather than drifting. This self-leadership builds confidence and reduces anxiety. You may also notice that your tolerance for self-sabotage decreases. Patterns that once felt familiar now feel uncomfortable. You interrupt them sooner. This self-interruption is a powerful sign of authority developing. Internal authority also improves your relationship with uncertainty. You tolerate not knowing without panic. You trust your ability to navigate as clarity emerges. This reduces impulsive decision-making. You may also experience a refinement of ambition. Ambition becomes less about proving something and more about building something meaningful and sustainable. This shift protects motivation from becoming fragile. Another sign is how you manage comparison. You stop measuring your progress against others' timelines. You focus on your own rhythm and standards. This independence strengthens self-trust. Internal authority also changes how you experience quiet. Silence becomes comfortable. Stillness becomes restorative. You do not need constant stimulation to feel okay. This indicates nervous system safety. You may also find that your sense of purpose becomes steadier and less dramatic. You are less focused on big moments and more focused on daily consistency. This steadiness supports long-term fulfillment. When it is said that very few qualify for this level of authority, it does not mean that others are lesser. It means that most people are never taught how to regulate emotions, manage attention, and build disciplined self-trust. These skills are learned, not inherited. Qualification comes through experience, reflection, correction, and commitment. It comes from choosing growth when avoidance would be easier. It comes from facing discomfort rather than numbing it. As this first part settles, understand this: the authority you hold is not about status, recognition, or external power. It is about coherence within yourself. It is the ability to think clearly under pressure, regulate emotion, honor commitments, and act in alignment with your values. This authority is rare, not because it is mystical, but because it requires responsibility that many people never choose to develop. What you are building is not control over others, but mastery over your own direction, and that mastery quietly shapes every outcome that follows. As this understanding of internal authority continues to deepen, you may begin to recognize that it changes how you relate to every area of your life, not just moments of stress or decision-making. It influences how you structure your days, how you approach long-term goals, how you handle conflict, and how you recover when things do not go as planned. Authority becomes less about controlling outcomes and more about maintaining alignment, regardless of circumstances. One of the clearest ways this shows up is in consistency. You no longer depend solely on motivation to move forward. You rely on systems, habits, and values. When motivation rises, you use it. When it fades, you still follow through. This reliability builds momentum that does not collapse during emotional fluctuations. Over time, this consistency becomes one of your strongest assets. You may also notice that your reactions to external pressure become more measured. Deadlines, expectations, or opinions from others no longer immediately trigger urgency or defensiveness. You evaluate what is reasonable, what is necessary, and what aligns with your priorities. This calm assessment prevents you from being driven by fear or people-pleasing patterns. Another shift appears in how you experience responsibility toward yourself. You take care of your physical and mental well-being with more intention. You recognize that exhaustion, poor boundaries, and constant overextension weaken clarity and judgment. Caring for your nervous system becomes part of how you protect your capacity to lead your own life effectively. Internal authority also strengthens your relationship with truth. You become more honest with yourself about what is working and what is not. You stop rationalizing unhealthy patterns. You address issues earlier instead of allowing them to compound. This honesty supports faster course correction and reduces long-term consequences. You may also notice that your emotional responses feel less extreme. Challenges still affect you, but they do not hijack your entire perspective. You maintain access to logic, empathy, and patience, even when under strain. This emotional steadiness allows you to remain effective when others might become reactive or withdrawn. Another important development is how you approach learning. You take responsibility for improving skills, understanding systems, and refining strategies. You do not wait for others to rescue you or provide perfect guidance. You actively seek growth. This proactive learning mindset increases competence and confidence. You may also experience a shift in how you relate to control. You stop trying to manage every variable and instead focus on managing your own actions and responses. This realistic focus reduces frustration and increases influence where it truly matters. Internal authority also influences how you build and maintain relationships. You communicate expectations more clearly. You address problems earlier. You choose connection based on mutual respect rather than emotional dependency. This maturity strengthens relational stability and reduces unnecessary conflict. You may also notice that your sense of personal dignity strengthens. You no longer tolerate behavior that undermines your self-respect. You do not engage in situations that require you to abandon your values to belong or succeed. This dignity preserves psychological safety and long-term confidence. Another subtle shift is how you respond to praise or criticism. Neither inflates nor deflates you as easily. You receive feedback with openness, but not dependency. This emotional neutrality protects self-concept and supports continued growth. You may also find that your patience with process increases. You stop expecting immediate mastery. You respect gradual improvement. This patience supports sustainable skill development rather than shallow performance. Internal authority also improves your ability to delay gratification. You choose long-term benefit over short-term comfort more often. This capacity strengthens financial stability, emotional health, and professional development. You may also notice that your thinking becomes more independent. You consider advice, but you do not outsource your decisions. You trust your ability to weigh information and choose wisely. This independence strengthens leadership over your own path. Another development is increased tolerance for solitude and reflection. You are comfortable being alone with your thoughts. You use quiet time to integrate experiences rather than escaping discomfort. This reflection deepens self-awareness and learning. You may also experience improved impulse control. You pause before spending, reacting, or committing. This pause protects resources and prevents unnecessary complications. Internal authority also reshapes how you experience ambition. You pursue growth without becoming consumed by comparison or competition. You focus on building competence and integrity rather than chasing status. You may also notice that your emotional vocabulary expands. You can identify what you feel with more precision. This emotional literacy improves communication and self-regulation. Another sign of maturation is how you handle disappointment. You process it without catastrophizing. You acknowledge loss or frustration without allowing it to define your identity or future. This resilience protects long-term motivation. You may also notice that your energy management improves. You schedule demanding tasks when focus is strongest. You rest before depletion becomes severe. This strategic pacing supports sustained performance. Internal authority also influences how you engage with uncertainty. You do not freeze or rush. You gather information, consider options, and move forward thoughtfully. This balanced response improves outcomes and reduces anxiety. You may also experience a stronger sense of coherence between who you are privately and how you act publicly. You do not shift identities based on audience or pressure. This integrity strengthens trust in yourself and from others. Another shift is how you approach conflict. You address issues directly but respectfully. You seek resolution rather than dominance or avoidance. This approach preserves relationships and emotional energy. You may also find that your self-image becomes more grounded. You are less attached to being seen as exceptional and more committed to being reliable, disciplined, and thoughtful. This grounded identity supports long-term contribution. Internal authority also refines your sense of timing. You recognize when to act and when to wait. You avoid forcing outcomes prematurely. This timing awareness protects investments of time and energy. You may also notice that your capacity for empathy increases without becoming emotionally overwhelmed. You understand others' perspectives while maintaining your own boundaries. This balanced empathy strengthens leadership and collaboration. Another development is increased respect for preparation. You plan, practice, and organize, rather than relying on last-minute effort. This preparation reduces stress and improves performance. You may also experience improved decision confidence. Even when outcomes are uncertain, you trust that you made the best choice with the information available. This confidence reduces regret and rumination. Internal authority is not rigid control. It is flexible stability. It allows adaptation without collapse and direction without rigidity. As this second part settles, understand this. The authority you are developing is expressed through reliability, discernment, emotional regulation, and self-respect. These qualities do not create dramatic moments, but they create powerful long-term trajectories. Very few people commit to building this level of inner structure because it requires sustained responsibility and reflection. Yet it is this structure that allows growth, leadership, and influence to remain stable rather than fragile. What you are cultivating is not dominance over circumstances, but stewardship of your own mind, energy, and behavior. And that stewardship quietly governs the quality of everything you build. As this level of self-governance continues to strengthen, you may begin to notice that your perception of difficulty also changes. Situations that once felt overwhelming now feel manageable, not because they are easier, but because you are more organized internally. When the mind is structured and emotions are regulated, challenges become problems to solve rather than threats to survive. This shift alone dramatically improves how effectively you move through life. You may also notice that your ability to tolerate responsibility increases. Larger roles, more complex tasks, and longer-term commitments no longer feel as intimidating. You trust your capacity to learn, adjust, and sustain effort over time. This trust does not come from perfection, but from repeated experience of handling difficulty and recovering when things do not go as planned. Another important development is how you handle moments of vulnerability. Instead of hiding uncertainty or weakness, you acknowledge it without losing confidence. You ask questions when needed. You seek clarity instead of pretending certainty. This honesty strengthens learning and prevents errors driven by pride or fear. You may also find that your sense of purpose becomes more refined. Rather than chasing multiple directions at once, you concentrate on fewer, more meaningful paths. This focus increases depth of skill, quality of contribution, and long-term satisfaction. Direction becomes clearer because distraction decreases. Internal authority also influences how you experience emotional intensity. You still feel deeply, but emotions no longer dictate your identity or your future. A bad day does not define you. A mistake does not rewrite your story. You experience emotional events as temporary states rather than permanent conclusions. This emotional perspective protects motivation and resilience. You may also notice that your communication style becomes more confident and respectful at the same time. You express needs clearly without aggression. You assert boundaries without apology. This balanced communication strengthens both self-respect and relationships. Another sign of maturity is how you manage expectations. You do not assume immediate results from effort. You understand that consistency compounds gradually. This realistic outlook prevents discouragement and protects persistence. You may also experience increased awareness of how your environment affects your behavior. You design your surroundings to support focus, rest, and clarity. You remove unnecessary friction. This environmental stewardship strengthens daily discipline without requiring constant willpower. Internal authority also refines how you relate to comfort. You recognize the difference between rest that restores and habits that merely numb. You choose recovery that strengthens rather than avoidance that delays growth. This discernment protects long-term well-being. You may also notice that your reactions to conflict soften. Instead of escalating or withdrawing, you stay engaged while remaining calm. You address issues with intention rather than emotion. This approach reduces damage and increases resolution. Another shift is how you experience ambition. You are no longer driven primarily by fear of falling behind or being overlooked. You are driven by desire to build competence and stability. This intrinsic motivation sustains effort even when external recognition is absent. You may also find that your self-evaluation becomes more accurate. You recognize both strengths and limitations without exaggeration or denial. This realistic self-assessment improves planning and learning. Internal authority also strengthens your ability to manage transitions. Whether changing roles, environments, or goals, you adapt more smoothly. You process endings without clinging and approach beginnings without unrealistic expectations. This emotional flexibility protects stability during change. You may also notice that your capacity for long-term thinking increases. You consider future consequences more naturally. You invest in skills, relationships, and habits that support future stability rather than only immediate comfort. Another important development is how you handle success. Success does not inflate identity or reduce effort. You remain grounded and continue improving. This humility protects growth from stagnation. You may also experience increased respect for process over outcome. You focus on quality of effort rather than obsessing over results. This focus improves consistency and reduces performance anxiety. Internal authority also influences how you relate to comparison. You are less reactive to others' achievements or timelines. You remain centered in your own progress. This independence protects confidence and prevents unnecessary pressure. You may also notice that your emotional vocabulary becomes more precise. You identify subtle emotional states rather than only extremes. This precision improves self-regulation and communication. Another sign of maturity is how you manage disappointment. You allow yourself to feel it without allowing it to distort your future outlook. You recover and re-engage rather than withdrawing. This resilience supports continuous progress. You may also experience increased patience with learning curves. You accept that skill development includes mistakes, slow periods, and repetition. This patience prevents frustration from interrupting growth. Internal authority also improves your ability to coordinate effort across multiple areas of life. You balance work, relationships, and personal development more effectively. You avoid neglecting one area to overinvest in another. This balance supports long-term stability. You may also notice that your internal standards become clearer. You know what behavior aligns with your values and what does not. This clarity simplifies decision-making. Another shift is how you handle emotional feedback from others. You receive it without collapsing or becoming defensive. You evaluate it thoughtfully. This openness improves relationships and learning. You may also experience stronger trust in your own judgment. You still consider advice, but you do not override your instincts easily. This self-trust strengthens leadership over your own life. Internal authority also refines how you manage stress. You use structure, routine, and recovery proactively, rather than waiting until exhaustion forces rest. This prevention preserves health and performance. You may also notice that your ability to remain calm under observation or evaluation improves. You perform with steadiness rather than anxiety. This composure supports leadership and professional growth. Another development is how you relate to failure in public settings. You maintain dignity and composure. You learn without shame. This emotional stability protects confidence. You may also find that your sense of fulfillment becomes more internal. You derive satisfaction from effort, growth, and integrity rather than external validation alone. This internal fulfillment sustains motivation. Internal authority is not about controlling every outcome. It is about remaining grounded, adaptable, and intentional regardless of outcome. This flexibility is what allows continued growth through changing circumstances. You may also experience a refinement of courage. Courage becomes less about dramatic risk and more about consistent honesty, responsibility, and perseverance. This quiet courage sustains long-term development. Another sign of readiness is how you handle waiting periods. You use them for preparation rather than frustration. You strengthen skills, habits, and understanding instead of only longing for movement. You may also notice that your emotional attachment to specific outcomes decreases. You remain invested without becoming rigid. This flexibility improves adaptability. Internal authority also strengthens your capacity to lead by example rather than instruction. Your consistency influences others without force. This quiet leadership grows naturally. You may also experience greater comfort with complexity. You accept that life contains mixed outcomes and imperfect solutions. This acceptance reduces emotional extremes. Another shift is how you manage uncertainty in relationships. You communicate instead of assuming. You clarify rather than speculate. This reduces misunderstanding and conflict. You may also find that your sense of direction becomes more stable. You are less easily pulled off course by temporary emotions or external noise. This stability protects long-term goals. As this third part settles, understand that authority within yourself is now expressing as steadiness across many areas of life: emotional, practical, relational, and cognitive. This steadiness does not eliminate difficulty, but it transforms how difficulty is handled. Instead of being overwhelmed by challenge, you are increasingly equipped to engage with it constructively. This is not accidental. It is the result of growth, reflection, and repeated choice. Very few people develop this level of inner structure because it requires patience, humility, and discipline, practiced consistently. What you are building is not fragile confidence, durable capacity. And that capacity quietly qualifies you for responsibilities and opportunities that require stability rather than spectacle. As this level of inner authority continues to strengthen, you may begin to notice that your relationship with influence changes. You are less interested in persuading, convincing, or proving yourself, and more focused on embodying the values you stand for. Your presence becomes steadier. Your actions become more consistent. Influence begins to come from reliability rather than intensity. This kind of influence is quiet, but it lasts because people trust what remains stable over time. You may also notice that your tolerance for superficial engagement decreases. Small talk, empty promises, and surface-level commitments feel less satisfying. You become attuned to the difference between noise and nourishment.